Yeah, my name is Volker Schulz. I'm a manager consultant with Sageti here in Omaha. I've been with Sageti for the last 2 years. Started to work with cloud computing about 4 years ago, and I actually struggle with finding real hands-on work because this is an emerging technology. It is something that's not easily embraced, and Sageti targets Fortune 500 companies. These companies are sitting on major investments, time-wise, money-wise, as well as resource-wise, that they put into their infrastructure, and so they're not easily open. They don't open the doors for these ideas. If we would target startup companies, it would be a completely different story. So what I want to do here today and present to you is basically how you can get started on the Azure platform. So Windows Azure is the overarching label, Microsoft label over their cloud offering. Underneath that is a platform as a service that they brought to the market about 4 years ago. They also offer infrastructure as a service. So cloud comes in 3 different flavors. It's the infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, as well as software as a service. What I want to dive into today in this little presentation here is how you get started for Windows Azure to build an application, debug it, deploy it as well. So since we only have 15 minutes, I want to dive into it right away. Before I start, a question to you is, does anybody work with Azure or any other cloud platform today?
Try to.
Excellent, good. Any other platform than Azure? There we go.
I work with Amazon and also Jitsu.
I've played with Google App Engine a bit.
App Engine, yes, very well. All right, so we're going to focus on Windows Azure today. To get started, you go to the Windows Azure website, the portal, and sign up. It's as easy as that. You don't have to deal with anybody on the phone. It's one of those modern 21st century web offerings, right, where you can sign up right away. You find free resources there. What you basically need is a subscription for the platform. You need the SDK, and they also offer a Windows Azure training kit to help you start building these applications. If you look for free resources, so maybe you're not as lucky as some of us around that work with companies that have an enterprise agreement with Microsoft and offer free paid as a go resources on the platform. These are the free benefits that you can get depending on your MSDN membership, or if you don't have an MSDN account, you can get a 90-day free, you can sign up for a 90-day free trial. And this table lists nicely what kind of free resources you get on this platform. So you get compute resources, you get storage and transactions in order to write and read from your storage, a certain bandwidth. The bandwidth into the Azure platform is free, so to upload anything into Azure storage is actually free. Any outgoing traffic is metered. You get a database, so depending on your MSDN account, you get anything between 1 and 5 gigabyte. There's a web edition database. There's also a business edition. The only difference between the two categories is capacity. So web edition was 1 to 5 gigabyte, whereas the business edition starts at 10 up to a limit of 150 gigabyte for relational storage. If you download the SDK for Visual Studio, if you're a .NET programmer, There are certain system requirements. You can download and install it on Windows 7 and Windows 8 or Windows Server 2008. The components that you get with the SDK are the compute and storage emulator that simulates the Azure infrastructure, the cloud infrastructure on your development platform, on your development box. So that's nice for offline development. So you don't need to be connected. That's actually a really nice feature. You get the .NET Azure assemblies and some nice Visual Studio tooling that entails the templates, debugging support, and also some profiling and IntelliTrace support that help you to debug the application after you deployed it out to the cloud. So that's enough of slides for now. I want to show you actually, and I hope I have enough time, how to build, debug, and then deploy it out to the Azure platform. So in order to do that, I think I already have Visual Studio 2012 instance open here. So I'm gonna. Can you all see that pretty well there? Do we need to zoom in? I think that's big enough, right? So you basically start with a new project. And as I said, the SDK provides all the tooling for Visual Studio. One of them are the templates. So you go into your templates and you will find a cloud template for an Azure cloud service. I'm going to name this Omaha MTG. And the next screen will allow you to choose certain roles. So each application that you develop under full Windows Azure could consist of multiple modules or multiple applications. That could be a web application with a background application. In order to create these applications, you could actually start with a web application and then equip it with the Azure binaries. What we do here right now, we start actually from scratch. So I'm going to create a Windows web application and equip it with the Azure binaries in order to build and package the application then for the Azure platform.
Question.
Go ahead, yeah.
That new cloud service that you added, is that going to be another project in the solution?
We will see that in the next step. That's exactly. So this is all preliminary. Here I'm just deciding I want to build a cloud application, and I choose roles. And the roles, just keep in mind, those are at the end the virtual machines, the application that runs in the virtual machine. So each of these roles that you choose here that basically are part of your application, of your solution, right, will end up running in its own virtual machine on the Azure platform. So on this, for demonstration purposes, I'm only going to choose one in this case. I'm going to name this one also Omaha MTG. Okay, and now Visual Studio builds the solution and the necessary projects under the solution. We will see we will have a Windows Azure cloud-specific project under the solution, and one role, one web application project. And you will see it looks like a out-of-the-box web application, ASP.NET MVC3 web application with a few add-ons that I will go through in a little bit. So it creates the solution, and you could see in the template or in the window that I showed right before, you can choose web roles as well as worker roles. There's some significant difference between the two. a web role will end up in a virtual machine that contains a web server, an IIS server. A worker role does not contain an IIS server, and a worker role is really designed and intended for background processing. Each of these roles are also equipped with endpoints, public endpoints as well as internal endpoints. So you can then open up ports by default. If you deploy and you don't open up any port, there's no endpoint equipped with that virtual machines. That's for security purposes. So you really have to, in your configuration, explicitly decide what port you want to open. Is it a public port or is it an internal port, and then connect for communication purposes between these roles the ports so that a web application can communicate with its background application over the role. So now that we've got the built up here, I'll collapse it here. We have, as I said, a Windows project and a web application MVC3 project. Let's look first at the MVC3 project and see what's different to our out-of-the-box standard MVC3 project. So under references, there are 4 Windows Azure specific assemblies that have been added to it. We've got a configuration assembly that contains, as it says, classes that bring the nuts and bolts in order to read in or leverage cloud-specific configuration, and we'll look at it in a minute. Diagnostics contains nuts and bolts to run diagnostics in the cloud and to equip your application with some profiling. We've got the service runtime, which is an assembly that provides classes that allow you to leverage virtual machine-specific resources like local storage, for example. It also allows you to set up role communication with an application, with a role that you deployed together with the web role. And the last one is the storage assembly, the storage client assembly, that allows you to program against the Azure Storage API. So with on the Azure platform, you can create a storage account that allows you to store blobs and tables and queues. And in order to leverage these storage services, you have that assembly available in your application here. There's one more class that has been added to the MVC3 project, which is the web role class. And the web role class provides basically the hooks to the Azure Fabric controller, to the software that runs on the Azure platform in order to deal with your application, in order to spin up and stop the virtual machine. So it's basically a global ASAX in the context of the virtual machine. So you can, if you open up the class, you can add some code that will be executed while your virtual machine is starting. You can react on, there are 2 other methods that you can override. On start is the first one, on stop as well as a run method. So that's really all on the MVC, on the web application side, on your role side. The Azure project contains a folder that basically contains the mapping between the Azure project and the role that you have defined to be part of that Azure application. And we have created this with one role. You can add more roles to the Azure project by adding and by going into the drop-down menu here. And it could be an existing application that you basically pull into your Azure solution, or it could be a brand new role that you define going through the same setup windows that we just saw. And then we have the configuration side for Azure solutions. So cloud configuration, Azure cloud configuration contains basically two files. We have a definition file and we have a configuration file. It's split up in order to allow you to set and change configurations while configuration values while your application is running in the cloud. So any parameters that are changeable during runtime are defined and declared in the configuration file. In the second one, in the definition file, in the cloud service definition file, that is basically the configuration that acts as a manifest for your cloud solution. So when Visual Studio packs your binaries and your configuration and sends it off, moves it out to the Azure platform, the Azure Fabric controller takes this package, looks at the definition file, and creates the virtual machine and spins it out based on the definition that's or configurations that have been declared in the definition file. If we open it up here, I don't know if that's easily visible. Zoom in a little bit. So this is a definition file, and you can see we have one web role. One web role tag. So if you have multiple web roles, you would see more of these web role tags with it. Within the web role, we also define in the definition file the size of the virtual machine, and we will see a little bit later that comes into 5 t-shirt type sizes, and this the default size is small. So that would be basically the resources that you would get with the virtual machine. And as I said, you will also create endpoints with the virtual machine. So in this case, we have one endpoint defined, which is public on port 80, and it also imports the diagnostics module in order to allow profiling, application profiling in Azure. So let's look at debugging really quick. You can, depending on which of the two projects is the startup project, I'm going to switch back to the web application project. You can debug the web application completely in Cassini without any cloud emulation. As I will show you in the second step. So if you just want to debug your cloud application without any Azure specific binaries, then you are still able to do it. If I click F5 now and compile this application and start the debugger, you will see that it will spin it up in Cassini. That's sometimes handy if you have a cloud application and you want to test all the code that has nothing to do really with your cloud specific deployment. So that has been successful. If I go back and stop the debugger and switch the startup project back to the Azure project, if I compile and debug it, now it will actually start the emulator. It will pack up your solution and deploy deploy to the emulator and run it in the emulator. And there's also a little emulator window that allows me to get some feedback. So we've got we have two emulators, a storage emulator and a compute emulator. Since this solution doesn't leverage any storage, we can ignore the storage emulator. But on the compute emulator side, I'm able to step in, and I can see here I have one deployment, one cloud service. Under the cloud service, I have one role, and of this role, we have one instance running. I would be able to add some profiling, and write some messages to this window as well, and step through the code. For demonstration purposes. How am I doing with the time, Matt?
You're close.
Close?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we should ship it off because that takes about 5 minutes. So once you're done with development, you debugged, you tested your application on your development box, and again, the emulator nicely enables you to do this without even connecting out to the internet or to the cloud platform. Once you're ready to deploy, you have multiple ways to do so. Within Visual Studio, if you right-click on your cloud solution, you can either just package it up and then use the Windows Azure portal website to deploy and promote your code to the platform, but you can also do all of the above from within Visual Studio using Publish. And when I publish, I first have to choose to what subscription. I could own multiple subscription, and under each subscription you would basically run your cloud assets. So I would first choose my subscription, and I would give this cloud service, this application, a name. I'm going to call it then I'm able to choose a region. So Microsoft has multiple Azure data centers globally spread out. I'm going to choose the one in north central US, which is actually located in Chicago. And now I'm almost ready to send it out. I'm going to choose debug settings, and I'm ready to publish. So this will pack up your solution and moves it out to the cloud, and will upload it to the Chicago data center. I will in a minute get some feedback down here in this lower left window. And it would probably take about 5 or 6 minutes until the code has been deployed, and I'll be able to start and run the application.
Quick question.
Go ahead, yeah.
Have you been actually developing this for any clients? Actually using this for customers or not?
Yeah, we have done a couple, three projects probably within the span of the last 12 months.
One ongoing right now.
And most of them POCs, so proof of concepts, and one of them ongoing. So there's a client we have right now, they're leaning towards the idea of Azure, but their management is not quite bought into it. They actually have mainly a IBM technology stack. They are not so much a Microsoft shop, right? So that could be the project though that you build is mainly built on Microsoft technologies, right? So that could be a scenario where, a client that might have a heavy investment and dependency on one type of technology and now wants to build a brand new project from scratch and chooses Microsoft, for example, that could be a way in of starting leveraging, testing the waters of testing cloud technologies or cloud infrastructures such as Azure. They have no experience with Microsoft, right? So it's kind of a POC. It's kind of a test for them. Is it possible or not? Or the other option would be to buy the server farm, right? To build this capacity beforehand. And if anything happens between now and the end of next year, when the schedule is scheduled, when the project is scheduled to be done, then they might have invested into something that they would never use. So the pay-as-you-go, or the concept of disposable computing, it's a compelling value proposition, right, at the end. So if even companies, enterprises like, let's take a big one here in Omaha, insurance companies are a very good example. They have invested over the last 20 years heavily in their own data centers. They wouldn't easily walk away from it. But in 20 years, they might be surpassed. It might, because it's a disruptive technology. You can operate now much leaner and much more flexible by saying, well, this system, this application is outdated, let's shut it down, and we build a new one, and without the heavy investments into infrastructure.
In theory, you should be able to mix and match to have some of your capacity in-house and some of the cloud. They talk a lot about
That's
that.
probably what we're going to see over the next decade or so, so-called hybrid solutions, right? So you start building asset applications in the cloud, you still have line of business services and data stores sitting on premise. Now you need to connect the two, right? And so that's something that Microsoft or other cloud vendors know, and they provide these services on the Microsoft Azure side. There's a platform service called the Service Bus. This helps you basically to extend these on-premise service endpoints into the cloud, provide a security layer, and connect the cloud assets to this back-end on-premise service. You have 5 more minutes? I'm the first one, so I should. Let's see where we are here. It's probably going to take a couple more minutes. But before I end, I want to go over and dive a little bit deeper into deployment.
How do you answer clients that say, okay, regulatory practices, like
Say that again?
Sarbanes-Oxley or PCI or whatever?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
What the clients would say to okay, I don't want to store my data in the cloud because I got regulatory constraints. In other words, I got PCI compliance,
Right.
I got Sarbanes-Oxley, whatnot, I'm just storing on somebody else's servers, basically, on this data center. Okay, that could, impact. What do you answer to that?
Sure. That's the first question you get basically. So, if you want to walk into the door of clients that have a huge investment in their own infrastructure, and you need to convince them about the benefits in the long run of looking at cloud solutions or considering cloud for hosting your applications. Security is one of the first concerns. You're absolutely right. There's no definite answer, I think, and But the approach we take is basically, it's not going to solve your current security problems. It will add to the challenge. You need to be aware. You need to know the service offering of the vendor. So you should know, for example, what their SLAs are. You should also know what their security certifications are. For example, Azure has a number of certifications. Among them is the HIPAA certification, for example, that allows or that helps clients to make such a decision. But it's not going to solve your data security problems, of course, because now you move these data into the public cloud. You've got to be aware on how these data are protected, what the data storage for relational data stores, what that API looks like, and what type of security levels the cloud vendor is applying. So what I said at the beginning, there's no definite answer. It's not going to solve your IT security challenges. It's add on another complexity to it, and I hope that kind of answers the question.
From a strictly business viewpoint, the question is, what's the ROI? Why should I do this?
Because
Is
you
it
might
add
be,
to my complexity?
that's a very good question. You might be surpassed in 20 years or so by your competitors that started to look into it, because the cost savings, the flexibility that you gain by leveraging the cloud are tremendous. You can ignore today. I would compare it with 100 years ago, right? When if you were an entrepreneur and you wanted to produce shoes, right? You built your plant next to the river, and you needed to generate somehow the power yourself in order to power your machines. Well, then came the grid, power plants, and of course, at that time, I'm sure there were a lot of people that were very comprehensive about it. Not comprehensive, but they are very skeptical about connecting to the grid. The same question: is that safe enough? Can they? What would they do if there's a power outage? Right? How will I be compensated? Because I will lose business. Right? This is the same type of scenario, similar, I would say, where you don't need to be concerned so much anymore about being or mastering IT if you're actually an insurance company. Yes, you need to still provide your business solutions, right? Focus now on business solution development, but you don't need to be a master of hosting all these computing assets, including your data. You're now able to look at something else that would obstruct that all to you. That makes sense.
Another thing is, with the cloud, you can scale up and scale down. It's not automatic, but you can do it. So say, 50% of all your web traffic happens in the first 3 days of the month. Then you can scale up to more roles then, and then scale back down for the rest of the month. You only pay for what you use, whereas if you're building an in-house data center, you're paying for all that capacity all the time.
So basically, we're moving into a utility.
It becomes a utility in a sense. They are not there yet, but as I said, 20 years from now, if you make these steps now, you will be there, right, with everybody else that made the move and that understood that the benefits and where this would lead. So yes, it will become most likely a utility, and you metered service and pay as you go. So back to the application that we just deployed to Azure, completed, so you get a nice report here and also some timestamps of the deployment process, and you can browse through the application, and we are on the cloud. And with that, I guess I'm going to give it to the next one, whoever is up, I don't know.
Welcome everyone. My name is Naveen Akode. I work as an architect for Team Software. I'm a Microsoft fan at heart, but recently, I'm kind of working in mobile applications as well. So today the topic is MS Build. For someone who know how MS Build works and something about MS Build, we'll look at how we are using, leveraging MS Build in mobile applications. For someone who doesn't know MS Build, we'll look at like the most basic building blocks, what it takes to create a MS Build project, what it takes to do a build. Okay, so let's get started. What are we going to look at? What is MS Build? What does it take to create a MS Build project? What does it take to get started? MS Build basics, what are the building blocks? Then we'll get into the demo. Then we'll get into MS Build usage on how MS Build gets used in .NET projects, how it can be used for building mobile projects, whether it's Android, whether it's iOS, and also we can look at like how we are leveraging MS Build along with TFS to do continuous builds for mobile applications. And then we can cover on, we can visit MS Build, how it can be extended. Okay, so starting MS Build, what exactly is MS Build? MS Build is a Microsoft build engine, which is known as MS Build, which is a platform for building applications. MS Build, Microsoft, before .NET, it was like Makefile, CMake, and NMake kind of thing. But with starting .NET, Microsoft came up with this, brought up this build engine to build .NET applications. It's kind of just an XML schema for a project that controls how the build has to perform, what things that needs to be done, what are the processes that needs to be taken care as part of the build. And MS Build is shipped as part of the OS, starting this stuff, and essentially it's shipped as part of the .NET framework. Okay. So what does it take to create a MS Build project? MS Build project is typically just an XML file. Okay, and it can be created in any XML editor. Visual Studio can also be worked. The benefit of using Visual Studio is that you will get IntelliSense with that. Covering the basics of MS Build, the core build process that gets run is msbuild.exe, which recognizes the project file, MS Build project file within the same folder or in another folder, and executes that. So let's have a simple demo and So I have this simple.proj file, which is just a text file. Okay, I'll be cheating a bit. So as I said, all right. So the first is an XML element, and then comes the project element. This project element is the root element of MS Build project. Okay, and target is the building blocks. You can have multiple targets in MS Build. By default, if you don't specify anything, by default the target, which is named as build, would be executed without any parameters to the msbuild.exe. So we'll try to run this. So how do you know, do I have a MS Build or not in my machine? All you need to do is just pop up a command prompt and say MS Build. If it is there, it would just throw some error. So that means MS Build is there in your machine. So so let's go and run this project. So if you can see, have this msbuild.exe. I didn't specify any project file or anything because my console is pointing to that particular folder. Just in case if the console is not pointing or you're not invoking msbuild through that particular folder, you can always give the full path and the project name. The first, it's invoking the build target, and then I kind of send a message, just output a message saying like my first MS build project, okay, and it says build succeeded. So So to add more to it, now if I have multiple projects, this is just like outputting some kind of a string, which is very basic. If we were to say like, hey, I wanna build some application, I created a small .NET application, which is nothing fancy, just a Windows Forms application. All it says is like hello big. Now something that's lesser known to people is like this particular project file is a MS build file. You have got the targets and commands within this project file. The way you can edit this is like unloading the project first, and then say edit project. And over here you would see the same similar kind of XML, then the same root element, and then these are the targets down below. So the project has, you can specify what if build is not the default target you want to invoke, you can specify what is the default target when this project has to be run. And this toolset version would let you know, would let MS Build know what is the version of MS Build that needs to be invoked. This helps MS Build to identify what is the bin directory of the MS Build, and what are the predefined directories and folders for that. Now, so let's go and build this project and see how we can invoke another build project within your MS Build project. So what we have is like something called task. So MS Build comes up as another task which is provided predefined. What all I'm doing is like I'm invoking MS Build task and providing, hey, you got to build this task, and save this. By the way, let me go back and delete these folders. So it has built the project, the Windows project, and if you can see, it has, you've got the bin folder and the OBJ folder is recreated. So this shows us like you can have targets within a target, or you can do tasks, any kind of task that you want to control. Okay, so. So we look at, we have looked at what is a project, we have looked at what is the target. Target is kind of individual building units. you can have multiple targets, and then each target can call another target. Or you can specify, hey, I want to run this target after this target kind of thing. Then comes the property group. A property is essentially a set of user-defined properties. It's kind of a name value, a key value pair, things that are defined by the user. And then we look at item group. What are item groups? These are item groups contain a set of user-defined items, like a set of files kind of thing. We look at all these. These are the just very basics of MS Build. We look at how you can write this and how you can leverage MS Build. So we look at the item group. So what essentially we are doing is we are having two targets over here. One is the MS build target, it is a build target, and this is another target that I have. The name that I have given to this target is clean, and I specify hey, when the build target is run, you got to run this target after that build target. And item group is, like I said, you can specify what are the files that you want to delete. So out of this, our earlier application, I want to delete the PDB file and the XML file, and I would be using this delete task, which comes along with MS Build. So I specify what are the files that needs to be deleted. So this is a user-defined item group, which is defined over here. You can pretty much define any number of items in an item group. Okay, and I say while deleting, treat errors as warning, and then I would say send a message saying clean is complete. Okay. So we have this bin, debug, and PDB and XML files. When I go ahead and run this, says it has invoked the build target first, and then it has invoked the cleanup target. So essentially, it's deleted the XML and PDB files. Okay. Let's go ahead. Property group. What is a property group? As mentioned earlier, you can define pretty much any property of your own and use it within the targets. So I'm going to define this property group here and say hey, I'm defining a property group called destination directory, and the destination directory is just DEST. So wherever the MS Build is running, it would create the destination directory over there. It would implicitly know that that's where the path lies. Okay. What I'm trying to do over here is, I would say create an item group which is directory to clean, which includes destination directory, and say remove directory. If at all it's there, just remove it. And then I create an item group which says files to copy. What are all the files that needs to be copied? Assuming your MS Build project has initialization, then build, and then deploy, and then cleanup, or kind of thing. Then you can have separate targets for that, and this as part of deployment, you want to copy all the output files to another folder. It can be on the same machine, or it can be on the network, anywhere it can. Okay. So I've got this copy. I'm using this copy task to copy the files to my destination folder. And so something which is really interesting over here is while copying, you can say just copy these files from this folder to that folder, or you can say, hey, I want to copy everything which is there within this folder, which includes the folder hierarchies and files and folders within those hierarchies. So something that that helps you over here is this person recursive diary. what this does is like, it kind of tells MS Build that copy, but copy everything recursively. Okay, and then I kind of send a message saying like deployment completed. This would be invoked once the cleanup is done. Okay, so though I have this target in between build and cleanup, based on the after targets property, it would know like what needs to be invoked. First build is the default target that would be invoked. Then at the cleanup I say like, hey, you got to invoke this target once the build is done. And then at the deploy I say like, hey, you got to invoke once the cleanup is done. Okay, so so this is the let's say this is my root folder. I'm gonna go and invoke this MS Build. It has created this destination folder and it has copied. This is the first copy task that I used. This one, files to copy would have only exe file, but on the other copy task I've said like, hey, copy everything recursively. So that's the reason it has invoked that and copied everything recursively. So if you go into Bin, you'll find those things. Okay. All right. So let's go back to our basics. So while invoking this this project, I don't specify anything. All I say is like just MS Build and kind of knows what is a project file and invokes that project file. What if you have duplicates? What if you have two project files within the same folder? We'll come back and say like, I don't know which project file to invoke. You got to specify what project file to invoke. You can use help and as any developer, I don't remember the options. But there should be something like file.
Let me just say MS Build in the file name.
Yeah, say that. Thank you. So and that invokes that. Okay. So these are some of the basics of MS Build. If you need to start, really looking at like have a small project, you want to build, you have custom tasks to do when the project is built, then you can use or leverage MS Build and use the default task available. Usage. Where all can MS Build be used? One is MS Build code in .NET project file that I demoed you. Your .NET project is essentially a MS Build project. Okay. So you can use an unload project from the project menu and then edit the project file and then reload it, and that particular project would be you can have custom tasks within that, and that would be invoked as part of your build. Okay. Something different that we are trying to do at Team Software is that we have got mobile presence in Android, we have got mobile presence in iPhone, iOS. Well, we can always go back and say like we can use Hudson for building Android or iOS, or we can use other SVN or JIT repository for doing all Java or Objective-C stuff. But being a Microsoft shop, Microsoft businesses have heavily invested in Microsoft technologies, and one of those is TFS. So when we have TFS, why not leverage TFS and MS Build to get the best of both worlds and have some cost savings over there. So we use TFS as a repository for both Android and iOS projects, and use TFS for building a continuous build as well as ad hoc builds of both the applications. How do we do that? So here's a small Android project that I created, a test project. Nothing fancy in this. It's just a simple screen. So to show you like how it can be done through command line, let me go back to. So this is the folder where we have this Android project, all the source code. Nothing to do with Microsoft. It's all there. Something what we did over here is like we created a MS Build project file and throw it in this folder. Okay. So if you want to create an Android binary, there are a couple of steps involved. Like you got to use the ski tool. You got to update the Android project. And something interesting over here is like you got to use this Ant. Ant is like what is MS Build for Microsoft in our Microsoft world. Ant is something in the Java world. Okay, so I'm leveraging Ant to do this Android builds, and using the jar signer to sign it and generate the binary. So APK file is the actual binary on an Android. I'm going to delete this and pop a just video. And say MS Build. So I can just relax and then make sure my binary is there. Okay. So these are the exact steps that Eclipse, which is the IDE used for creating the Android projects, would be used. All it does, it says like, hey, build is successful and then successful. And if I go over here, I can find my APK file, and then we can go pretty much. What we are doing is like we're using TFS to pull out the mobile sources, do the build, which is nothing to do with Microsoft. We're using MS Build, leveraging whatever is there with us, and then deploy onto our servers. So all our testers or QC people will do is like take their mobile phones. When we say like when the build is done, you receive an email saying like, hey, build is done. Okay, you got to test it. So take your mobile phone, point it to our public IP, and then install and start testing it. All right. So let me give you an example of how we are doing it. We are using it for doing continuous builds. So in the last 48 hours, these are the Android builds that we have done through TFS. It gives you pretty much every detail of like what's going on behind the scene. You can view the logs. It would give you the log. You can control anything. And if I go to the MS Build log, this is the actual MS Build code that's executed for us. This is the custom code, but it's kind of intense. You can pretty much use the same concept to build mobile applications for Android and iOS. Something very interesting. On iOS, Apple says like you can only build your iPhone projects on MacBook. Well, not a problem. What we do is like we kind of use TFS as our repository, wherein the developers check in, check out, and we do everything through the TFS. And when we say Q new build, we kind of pull all the sources, pump it or push it to a Mac build machine, and then invoke the Xcode project remotely. Something that can be used is a well-known SSH client called PuTTY. You can use PuTTY to configure everything and just invoke PuTTY, go for a coffee, and then your build is done. Okay. So this is like This is very useful in an environment wherein like there are 10 Microsoft developers, 1 or 2 Android and iOS developers, and you don't want to have overhead of like maintaining another repository, maintaining another build software kind of thing, which is overhead from admin purpose as well. For now, if you are using SVN or something, then you got to take a backups of those as well. TFS as part of daily backups, those are all taken care for you. Okay. So that was about building MS Build, using MS Build to build mobile applications, using TFS to as a repository, as well as your build for other technologies. When it comes to MS Build extensibility, you might be wondering like, hey, do I need to write all these tasks by hand, or do I need to what if I have some very specific scenarios wherein I can find this task with the default MS Build project schema. Well, there's something called MS Build extension pack that you can download and start using it. It has got very a long list of tasks that covers the whole build scenarios that you might have to go through. Okay, and by any chance, even if that doesn't suffice, then you can always go and create your own custom task, like the delete or copy or MS Build. You can have your own custom task and use it using this MS Build project. Okay, that's it about MS Build. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. So I wanted to talk about Avalon Edit because it's a library I've used that's kind of cool, kind of interesting. Avalon Edit is a syntax highlighting text editor that is available as a WPF control, so you can use it in your projects wherever you would use a text box. It is WPF only, unfortunately. It uses some of the low-level drawing primitives that are only available in full WPF, so no Silverlight, no WinRT. But it is free and open source. And this is the short list of features. It's got syntax highlighting. It comes with a bunch of different languages out of the box. I didn't happen to find a page on their site that listed them when I was putting this together, but they've got C#, they've got XML, they've got a bunch of languages just built in. All you do is set a property and it's highlighting that language. They support code folding, so collapse, expand, the little plus, minus, and the gutter. They have hooks where you can hook in IntelliSense for however you want. So this takes more work on your part because you have to understand whatever language people are typing in, right? And have the suggestions, but they have hooks for showing the parameter info tooltip and also for showing completion lists. It's extensible. In fact, several of its own features are written using its extensibility framework. Code folding is not part of the base control. They implement code folding as a plugin. It is good at handling large files. The example they give is the XML documentation for MS Core Lib, which is 7 meg, and they say it gets really good performance with that. I haven't tried it, but it's supposed to be good with large files. And it is the text editor control used in Sharp development, which is the open source version of Visual Studio, right? So that should give you an idea of what it can do. The site is avalonedit.net. That'll redirect to the GitHub site, actually. It's also available as a NuGet package. And the documentation, if you go to their website, they've got links to a couple of code project articles, 3 code project articles that they wrote that kind of document the philosophy behind it, the design of classes and how they work together, and how you do extensibility. And if you're going to play with Avalon Edit, definitely read those articles. They're quick reads and they give a really good overview of how to use it. just gonna talk briefly about some of the stuff you can do with it to kind of give you an idea of, oh, maybe this is something I could use. The model object, the core data object, is the text document. And it's just a collection of characters. It doesn't have anything about syntax highlighting, it doesn't have anything about code folding, it's just the text. But it's designed to be very performant with that. So you can insert text in the middle and you don't have to wait for megabytes of data to be moved around every time you type a character. They've got all kinds of crazy data structures that they use to make that work, so you don't have to wrap your head around that kind of craziness. So at its core, it's just a bunch of characters, and you can index into that by offset, which is how many characters from the beginning of the file to this spot. For convenience, they also give you a collection of individual lines that you can index by, line 55 or whatever. And they, again, use crazy data structures. Indexing into that is, I think, O of log n. Or maybe, I don't remember. The articles tell you. So you primarily index into it by offset, but they also have a text location struct that is a line and column, and some utility methods to convert back and forth between the two representations, so whatever you need. And then the text document is single-threaded. It's meant to be used from a single thread, but there is one thread-safe method you can call from any thread at any time, which is create snapshot. So the user can be in the middle of editing something, and you can kick off your background autosave at any time, which is pretty cool. I have no idea how they do that. Some things that you would use a lot if you're doing any kind of power usage of it are anchors and segments. A text anchor is just an offset into the file, but as you edit, it moves. So if you insert text before it, it stays at the same logical position within the document. They automatically fire the update events to keep it in sync. And then there's also an anchor segment, which is the start and end position, so it's a range of text. And they've got a text segment collection, which they use several different places, that basically gives you quick intersection. So you can say, I've got this text segment collection that has all of my bookmarks, or all of my breakpoints, or all of my code folding sections. And now, give me all of those that intersect the line I'm currently drawing. So that I can say, find all the breakpoints on this line so I know whether I need to draw a red background. That's cool. So you would use these things for bookmarks, breakpoints, code folding, custom highlighting, all kinds of stuff. And with the extensibility, you can customize the way it draws stuff on the screen. Some of the most important ideas there are visual line. So the text document is just characters, but when it comes time to lay it out on the screen, it creates a visual line that is kind of a transient class. It goes away when you scroll it out of view, right? So it's just, there are visual line instances for just what's currently scrolled into view. But one thing I didn't mention is you can have the same text document hooked to multiple views, and they'll all stay in sync as you edit, so you can do split screen. So visual lines are created automatically, and you can hook into those to customize the rendering, like make some of the text bold, or syntax highlighting operates on those. There are element generators which create UI elements for a visual line, and you can hook into that to put, say, an image in the middle of the line if you wanted to. Like if you wanted to do emoticons or something in your doc comments to show little icons or whatever like that. You can put buttons in the middle of the line. I haven't done that, but it sounds pretty cool. Line transformers let you manipulate the presentation of that visual line to change foreground colors, italic, bold, things like that. Syntax highlighting is built using line transformers. And you can also do custom formatting. So if you want to say, I don't want to use a syntax highlighting rule set, I want to do something very specific, like I'm doing Fortran and I want to highlight everything from column 9 through 17 in a different color or something wacky like that. You can do it. You just hook in. And then there are background renderers. So there are multiple layers in the rendering. There's the background layer, which is just background color, but you can also do draw a red box on there for your breakpoint line, or a different background color for your dot comment or something like that. Then in front of that is the text, and there's the caret layer, which is the blinking cursor, and there's the selection layer, which is the highlight around highlighted text. And background renderers let you draw whatever you want to that background layer, so it shows up behind the text. And just to give kind of a quick demo of what you can do with it, this is an app that I wrote for our department to help us do code reviews. So there are lots of code review tools out there for Git if you're running on Linux, but not so many of them that actually run on Windows. And we use Git TF, so we've got TFS, but we use Git on top of it to do lots of local changes and then match them up. And it's nice to be able to look at the diffs in a visual way rather than just, oh, here's a lot of lines with minuses and pluses at the first character. And so this is just a visualizer for diffs that I wrote. And this is hard-coded with a diff file that I captured earlier. It doesn't actually run Git to output the diffs. But you can see the background colors just barely. This whole section has a dark red background going across the whole width of the editor. So this is the section of deleted code. But then I do extra highlighting around the actual text. So I'm using diffplex as well, which is an open source diff algorithm I break this out into words and then diff the words so that I can show just what changed within a line, not just that the whole line changed. So like here's a good example. You can see this line was deleted, this line was added, but here I show the actual interesting change within the line. And Avalon, particularly use Avalon Edit for expand collapse. So this is the code folding support. So I can collapse a whole file's worth of diffs once I'm done looking at that file. I want to get it out of the way. Or I can collapse individual chunks within the file. And then I also, of course, have a background renderer to draw the dark red and then highlight around the text. And Avalon Edit has helper methods that says, I've got this text segment, something I call it, the range. Give me the series of rectangles that represents that on the screen. And it can also give you a path which has rounded corners and stuff. And so I did not do a whole lot of coding to get the highlights around this code. And just to briefly look at the code. So let's look at the example first. So I've just got an Avalon Edit text editor. I set the text foreground color and this stuff. So I set the foreground and background color. I set it to read only, which actually lets me pre-generate all the spans for the code folding. Normally you have to update the code folding regions as the user edits, just periodically update that. But I can get away with only updating it once because it's read-only. Font size, show show a horizontal scroll bar when needed. Pretty basic stuff there. And then I create my custom diff background renderer class and add it to the background renderers collection. And there we go, I've got all my background highlighting. And I also call folding manager.install, which adds the code folding plugin. And then tell it, here's my set of code folding, start and end points, and what's nested inside and everything like that. Actually, it figures out the nesting itself. And so pretty little code to get this to work. Still took a while to puzzle it all out, of course. And my background renderer, I tell it which layer, so there are those 4 predefined layers, and I tell it which one to draw in, and then it calls the draw method whenever something changes, whenever the user scrolls or types something in, which they don't in this case because it's read-only. So I have to check to make sure that I have visual lines, because that might get called while it's still initializing and doesn't have any text, any visual lines generated yet. And then I draw the backgrounds for the header lines, so the line at the beginning of a file that has the file name, I had a gray background, and the one at the beginning of a chunk of code within the file, I drew a blue background. And then draw diff backgrounds, draws the dark red backgrounds over the whole section, and then the lighter red around just the spans of text. And so draw line backgrounds just says, I won't spend a lot of time going into all of this. Basically, I just get the rectangle or the whole span. So I've got the starting visual line, the ending visual line. I can make a span out of that, get the rectangle, fill it. And that's it. A little more interesting for the text segments. So first, I find the first line in a view, the last line in the view, so I can make a range for the whole window, whole document window. And then I say, okay, now find all the segments that I find based on the diffs. I've got, here's the start and end of the subline level diff, right, the word that changed within the line. I find the list of all those that are actually in view. Loop over them, create a background geometry builder which creates the path. And I actually do some rounding and such to make it look good. And then draw. It's got some bugs that I work around. For example, you can do Alt-Shift. You can do Alt-Drag to do a rectangular box, but if it's 0 width, you get these weird spikes. I don't know if you can see those very well.
Yep, yep.
So there's bugs in their rendering, and I work around those by drawing a little bit differently. When I know there's a line with a 0 width, I just draw a rounded rectangle myself instead of using their path generation. But so anyway, just a brief view of something interesting you can do with Avalon Edit. You know, I write software for banks. I didn't think I'd ever be using a syntax highlighter for anything useful, but an internal facing tool. Yeah. Any questions? Or?
So that was open source.
Yes. LGPL.
All right, thanks, Joe. Just a real quick show of hands, how many have played with Web API? Okay, we've got a few. Talk about it real briefly in here before we get into the JavaScript part of it. Web API gives you is a relatively new piece of software from Microsoft that's been added to the ASP .NET stack. And it's a way, gives you a toolkit to build RESTful applications. Kind of sets some guidelines and some rules out that help guide you down that nice happy path to get to RESTful style applications. And the way that I'm using it here is to build an API that my client-side JavaScript can talk to pull information from the server. So here you can see I have I've implemented a user controller, and it implements this API controller. And within there, you define your methods based around the HTTP verb names. So I have one method implemented on the GET method, and that will respond to any GET requests and return these results. So, if you've never played with Advanced REST Client, I strongly recommend it. It's an awesome tool. It's a Chrome extension for working with REST APIs. So if I go into my Visual Studio solution, you see I have the user controller. User is the object that I'm working on. I'm going to be doing a GET method on it. If I come over to my Advanced REST Client here, you can see I have my API, and I set that up in my routes. Just pull that up real quick. So with the whole Web API stuff, you have another routing engine that sits next to your MVC routes. It looks really familiar. A lot of this looks really familiar if you work with MVC. The default routes are these guys down here that's commented out. I have another set of routes that I use quite a bit that kind of facilitate more RPC style calls if I need them, where the default route really focuses just around the give, post, put, delete HTTP method calls. Where you can see I have get, post, put, delete, and I also have one that implements, or that has actions and stuff like that allows me to do more RPC style calls. But anyhow, in my routes you can see I define this /API/controller, so that's gonna, when the request comes into /API/user, it's gonna interpret that as the user part's the controller. So in my user controller, it hit it because it was a get verb, so it hit the get action, and it's just going to go through. And this one, all that I'm returning is a list of users with groups. You can see I'm not pulling it from the database, I'm just throwing it in there as I'm going. And the results get serialized out to JSON. Another nice little feature that the Web API takes care of for you is if the client's requesting JSON data, it'll send it JSON data. If it's requesting XML data, it'll send XML data. So that's the basics of the Web API part. Now, the handlebars part. So over here I have just a really simple Bootstrap template page here. And if we look at it, you can see there's nothing out of the ordinary. I have this main content area that lines up with this top section up in there. And you can see it's got an ID of main content, so it's something that I can call from my JavaScript and address from my JavaScript code. I also have this button down here with an ID of get users. Once again, that will look input from my JavaScript code. If I go into my demo, you'll see all that I'm doing is hooking up that button. When it's clicked, it's going to call the get users method. That's going to make my get call. And where it gets interesting is when I get that data back from that get call, I'm calling this template source, or this template set, which is where it gets a little bit different, and this is where the handlebars part comes in. If I go over to my HTML file, you'll notice I have this script block just kind of hanging out here down at the bottom. It's labeled as a script block. That way the browser will happily ignore it if it's not JavaScript. It just kind of blows right past it and ignores it. But if you look at it, you'll see, I just moved it. I have something in there that looks like HTML. It's an HTML table with these funny little chunks of stuff in there. And that is the handlebars template language. That's also where it gets the name from. Little handlebars, looks like little handlebar mustaches. So all that this handlebars template is saying is, step back and the data that's coming back, you'll see it's just sending back an array of 3 objects, and those objects have an email, a user admin, and then they have an array of groups underneath there. So if I go into my template, you'll see, seeing as those objects are at the very root of that object, I'm just saying for each object in this array, loop over this chunk of code. So for each item, it's gonna add a new row to my table. And then for each of those items in that array, go ahead and pull out the username and render it in the middle of this table cell. Same with email. If they're an admin, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to render that table cell tag with a background color of red. Otherwise, I'm just going to render it, and then I'm going to do the same with each group that they're a member of. Just going to loop over it and render it, and jump back into our JavaScript. All that I'm doing here is I'm saying, okay, using jQuery, go ahead and give me the HTML that's in that template script block. So I have a reference to that. And then go ahead and call out handlebars to compile that template. It's going to compile that template once. There is a little bit of a performance hit when it's first compiling that down. But after it's compiled it, it's nice and quick. And then I have it in this template table. The original data did not have this is admin in there. And one of the catches with handlebars, they talk about it being logicless templates. So they really try and enforce the no logic in your template. The only real logic that they have by default is this if. And you can't even do an if 1 equals 1. I mean, it has to be true or false. It doesn't actually evaluate a chunk of code. It just either has to be the value, true or false. So as soon as I get the data, I basically loop through the data to get down to the point to see if they are actually an admin. If they are, I go ahead and slap in is admin equals true in there, just so that my handlebars template can read that. And then the table template object that I created up here, all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pass it that data, and it's gonna give me a chunk of HTML. I then go back to my main content area, I empty the current content out of there, and I dump in this newly rendered HTML template. So the end result is breakpoints. I get a nice, easy to work with rendering of that table, as opposed to going through and manually concatenate HTML and all that sort of mess. So it's interesting tool to look at. It's kind of a stepping stone on the way to something like Knockout, more fully featured ones that don't quite have enough to go the fully single page app, but you do have enough to drop in some templates like this. So, any questions?
What's the compile do? Where's that doc, what does that actually do?
It's actually compiling down to a JavaScript object. I haven't looked into it any more than that. If I go,
It started as just,
if I,
I'm just looking for those double curly sections and turn them into footers. Yeah, okay.
so if I just do a log in there,
That was, that thing that you get back from compile is actually a function. Oh, yeah,
Correct.
that's why you
Correct.
have some function that data.
so yeah, it's returning. Yeah, I'm sure context and stuff like that, but yeah, it's compiling down into a JavaScript object that you can do stuff on.
Back, guys, discussed the server side before you go up.
Yes. Yeah, you'll see, you can do that with Node, you can actually compile that down server side and throw that across the wire so that you're not even compiling it client side. I don't know, I've played with it and I have one in particular that's got 3 or 4 templates on there and they're pretty good sized templates, and I haven't noticed any performance, client side performance hits on them, so.
I think you guys are right, like new Gmails and stuff, so.
Yeah.
push the time,
Yeah.
across.
And I would say if you are doing something like writing a Gmail client, you're probably in the territory of looking at one of the single page app frameworks like Knockout or like Backbone or something like that. And even some of those can use handlebar templates too, so. Any other questions?
Are those, is the web API a big win over like MVC partials, or is there a line where you
Well, the MVC partials are still going to be rendered server side, where
Okay.
the idea with this is move it to the client side. You know, and I guess potentially a performance advantage that you could have is if you're throwing a small template over the wire and a whole bunch of JSON versus a
Sure,
great big
whole.
server side rendered table or something like that. You could be sending less data over the wire. But the really selling point for it is more so for the more interactive, you know, Ajax-y style apps.